get the smudgies out. Hey everyone, this is some random guy and God. Welcome to like the 5th video. We're doing pretty good, doing pretty consistent work here. I'm pretty happy about it. Last week I asked you guys to read chapters 6 and 7 of Genesis, and so we'll be getting right into that today. So if you open your Bible, I will open mine. Dive right in. In verse 1, when man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. So going back to verse 2, it talks about the sons of God. Well, what the heck are the sons of God? Most of the time in the Bible, when we hear the phrase the Son of God, we're thinking of like Jesus. But that is not the case here, let me tell you. The reasoning behind that is because of what happens next. It's really not a good thing. It definitely brings up some questions that I feel need to be answered. So I looked up, I kind of know what they are, but I looked it up anyway for you guys' benefit and my benefit as well. Just basically like, what are the sons of God? Well, first of all, this exact term is used only once in the book of Genesis, and it's right here, obviously, and then 3 times in the book of Job, and then once more in Daniel. But every time it refers to some angelic being, which makes sense. There are only a few interpretations of this. The one that most people believe, and the one that makes the most sense, is the Nephilim, since the word is right there. And the Nephilim were basically, angels who fell with Satan, who sided with Lucifer when he came up against God. By the way, Satan's name before he fell was Lucifer, in case you didn't know that. And so for some reason, they decided to side with Lucifer instead of Jehovah. And so that went really bad for them, and they were cast down to the earth as well. It says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, which also translates to giants. So the Nephilim were huge. They were like big old guys. And no. The Nephilim were the offspring of the fallen angels who had sex with human women. They created giants, which sounds super weird and like hyper mythological, but I mean, it's in the Bible. It's what happened. The reason I know the Nephilim were the offspring of the fallen angels and the daughters of men is because it says right afterwards in verse 4, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. Those are the Nephilim. That's what that's saying. There's also other references of the Nephilim later on in the Bible and New Testament, oddly enough. We're short on time, so I'm just going to give them to you. 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. And then read Jude. There's only one chapter in Jude, so it's just verses 6 and 7. I encourage you to go read it. It kind of brings some more depth to the Nephilim thing because it's really vague here. Like, we understand what they are, but there's nothing much else. It kind of proves its existence because more than one author agrees that this is a thing. Moving on to verse 5. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts in his heart was only evil continually. Every thought was evil. Every thought of mankind back then was evil at that point. That's just crazy. Not a single good thought passed through the minds of man. It must have been really rough. That sounds like the apocalypse. Because of this, it says in verse 6. Now this is really interesting. Verse 6 says, And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. Continuing on, verse 7, So the Lord said, I will blot out man, whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them. Verse 8, But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Noah was the only good person on the planet. That is just kind of terrifying, not gonna lie. I'm fidgeting a lot in this video. I don't know what's going on. I'm nervous. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord, and his family as well. So I guess kind of going back to verse 6, when it was saying the Lord was sorry he made man on the earth. That just like, we really messed up. We made God sorry for making us. Like, that's a big uh-oh, big oof. That doesn't really sound like God. I mean, because we were made for him. We were made to worship him and, to love him. And I think because we were separated from that and we have diverted from his original path so hardcore, he was like, oh. I think part of why it broke God's heart so much to see man, his creation, in such a corrupt state was because he knew the purpose. He knew the purpose that we were supposed to have, and he knew like our potential and like what we were missing out on, what we still are missing out on a lot of the times. We're definitely not as bad as these guys, but anyway, so I looked it up. This is the New International Reader's Version, or the NERV. The Lord was very sad that he had made man on the earth. His heart was filled with pain. Ouch. But I would also like to point out, it specifically says made man on the earth. So I looked that up as well. And it took me to this Jewish website, which was really interesting. There's an article. He says, God thought, this is in quotations, God's thoughts. It was my mistake that I created humans below as a terrestrial or animal being. Had I created them in the higher realms, they, like the angels, would not have rebelled against me. And I still don't really know what to think about it. I just thought I would give you something to think about, maybe challenge your thoughts a little bit. I think that's really cool, because it kind of broke my heart, because like we really messed up. We broke God's heart, like to the point where he was like, I'm sorry I ever made them in the first place. But it specifically says made man on the earth. It says that in the NERV, New International Reader's Version, and in the English Standard Version, that he made man on the earth. It's kind of specific. So I believe that's probably what it's talking about. Yeah, but Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Verse 9, these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man. Noah walked with God, and he had 3 sons. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was filled with violence. I think this is also important. This is like a little sermon. Oftentimes our sight differs, and our perspective differs from the perspective of God. What we deem right is not what God often deems right. I think we need to approach life with the intention of thinking, would God deem this right? What would God think about this? What would God do? What would Jesus do? What would Jesus do? It's a cheesy saying, but it's very valid. We need to have that mindset more often. Yeah. Moving on to verse 12. Verse 18, but I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female, of the birds according to their kinds, and of the animals according to their kinds, of every creeping thing of the ground according to its kind. 2 of every sort shall come into you to keep them alive. Also take with you every sort of food that is eaten, and store it up. It shall serve as food for you and for them. Verse 22, Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. God did... You know what? It doesn't even say that Noah questioned it. He was like, all right, sounds good to me. Which I guess I wouldn't really argue either if he told me he was going to kill everything. So good on Noah. One of the few Bible characters who wasn't like, but I'm not good enough, God. I have a speaking problem. I guess it was a little bit more dire in this situation, but whatever. That's so impressive. All the animals that we see today, they are alive because Noah said, okay, God. So it's important to say okay to God. If he tells you to do something, you better do it. Now, this is also the first covenant we see being made in the Bible. This we see God trying to bridge the gap between man and God, reaching out to us and being like, come back to your original purpose. And this is the first covenant of that we see. The next one I think we see is Abraham. But 18, it says, but I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. Moving on to chapter 7. Woo, woo. For in 7 days I will send rain on the earth, 40 days and 40 nights. And every living thing that I have made I will blot out from the face of the ground. And Noah did all that God had commanded him. Verse 6, Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters came upon the earth. And Noah and his sons and his wife, and his sons' wives with him, went into the ark to escape the waters of the flood. Noah was 600 years old when it started to rain. So when I saw that, I wondered, how long did it take him to build this stinking ark in the first place? And so in chapter 5, verse 32, it says, after Noah was 500 years old, Noah fathered Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Noah waited 500 years to have children. I think this is so bizarre. But I guess life was a lot different back then. Because it says after Noah was 500 years old, he fathered them. So, after his 3 sons were born, because then in verse 6 it mentions his 3 sons. So it was at some point after all 3 kids were born. And anyway, so I looked it up. If there's any question I have in the Bible, I look it up. Because there's some pretty good stuff out there. There's about a range of 50 to 75, 80 years is how long it took to build the ark. Which is a long time. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day, all of the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened, and rain fell upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. So not only was the water coming from up top, it was coming up from the ground, too. Yeah, there was no escape, y'all. On the very same day, Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham, Japheth, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons with them, entered the ark.
They and every beast according to its kind, and all livestock according to their kinds, creeping thing, or birds, every winged creature, they went into the ark with Noah, 2 and 2 of all flesh, in which there was the breath of life.
And those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded them. And the Lord shut him in. Noah didn't even have to close the door. God was like, here you go. Verse 17, the flood continued 40 days on the earth. The waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters prevailed and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the face of the waters. And the waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. The waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep. That's a lot of water. Think of Mount Everest. Mount Everest. Okay, let's look it up. Apparently, Mount Everest is only 5 to 6 miles above sea level, which doesn't sound like a lot. But the floodwaters were 15 cubits above Mount Everest at least. Oh, so I looked up how big of a cubit, how big a cubit is, and apparently a cubit is from the elbow to the fingertips, about 18 inches, relatively, 1.5 feet, probably. 15 cubits would be like 22 feet. So the mountains, so Mount Everest was covered up by at least 22 feet of water, which is something. That's something else. It's definitely enough that everything on the earth died, except for Noah and everything in the ark. All the flesh died. Everything on the dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. He blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the ground. Man and animals, creeping things, of birds of the heavens, they were blotted out from the earth. That's a lot of repetition. They wanted to make it clear. Everything was dead. Only Noah was left, and those who were with him in the ark, and the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. They were way up high in the sky for months. 150 days, I looked this up too, is 44% of an entire year. Just imagine being trapped on a boat for 6 months with the world's population of animals. I'm glad it wasn't me that had to do that. But that's the end of chapter 7. So, there's a lot of interesting stuff there. That's it for chapter 6 and 7. Next time, I would like for us to read 8 and 9. So go read those up before next time so we can come prepared, ready to receive, because I think next week is going to be really good. All right, everyone. Now, the song of the week is Your Name by Baloche. Wonderful, awesome song. Anyways, I will put a link in the description to that song. You can go listen to it there. And I also have a bunch of links down below for my social media, Facebook and Instagram. Go read chapters 8 and 9 and go listen to the song Your Name by Baloche. I'll even put it in the eye up here, so go check it out. This has been Some Random Guy and God, and we'll see you in the next video.